Hello, my name is Alice Paul. I'd like to introduce you to my friends Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Sojourner Truth. Today we are going to tell you the story behind the 19th Amendment. This book is called Elizabeth Started All the Trouble. It's written by Doreen Rappaport and illustrated by Matt Faulkner.
Hi, I'm the one who started all the trouble. I'm Elizabeth. Over 235 years ago, Abigail Adams got a letter from her husband. John was in Philadelphia in a big room with lots of other men, and the colonists had declared independence from Great Britain and were busy writing new laws for the new nation. Now, Abigail was ecstatic. She wanted independence as much as John did, but she was worried. Would women be included in the new laws? She warned John that if women were not remembered, they would start their own revolution. John just laughed at her. It took much longer than Abigail wanted for that revolution to begin, but it finally started 72 years later. Remember the ladies. Now in 1840, I and Lucretia Mott and their husbands traveled 3,000 miles across the ocean to London. We were meeting people from all over the world who were working as hard as we were to end slavery. And when we got to the meeting, Lucretia and I found out that we're not going to be allowed to be delegates. In fact, if women wanted to be there just to listen to the men speak, they had to sit behind a curtain so they wouldn't be seen. Well, Lucretia and I were shocked. How could men who were against slavery deny women their rights just because they were women? We had to do something to change this. Well, it took much longer than we would have liked, but on July 13th, 1848, Lucretia and I met with 3 friends to plan a meeting in Seneca Falls, New York, to discuss women's rights. Now, the women knew they needed to write some kind of declaration so people would understand what they wanted. But what should they write? I read aloud from Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Well, we all agreed that it was a great document as far as it went, but Jefferson had left out some very important things. I said I would rewrite it. I did, and I gave it a new name, the Declaration of Sentiments. We planned a 2-day convention to begin 6 days later. We put a notice about the meeting in a local newspaper. At that time of year in upstate New York, well, most women were busy on the farms, and the planners didn't think many would come. Boy, were we wrong about that. 300 women came from far and near, by horse, by wagon, some even walked. Well, the convention had just planned just for women, but when 40 men showed up on the first day, well, we just let them in. The women didn't feel confident enough to lead the meeting. In those days, it wasn't considered proper for women to lead meetings if men were present. So we asked Lucretia's husband, James, to do it. For 2 days, things went along smoothly as one person after another made speeches. Elizabeth read and reread her declaration, paragraph by paragraph, and people discussed what I'd written. And like the male colonists who had listed their grievances against the King of Great Britain, I listed all the unfair laws against women written by men. It was a very long list. It was unfair that women couldn't go to college or become doctors or lawyers or ministers. It was unfair that women could not keep property they inherited. It was unfair that women had to give any money they earned to their husbands. Everyone agreed. No one could deny it. Everything I said was true. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. But there was lots of debate over my statement that women deserved the right to vote, and it was their sacred duty to get it. Now, the idea of women voting was too daring for most people at the convention, including many women. Out of 300 people, only 68 women and 32 men signed their name to my declaration. My husband didn't sign. He had left town when I told him that what I was planning to say. And when my father heard what I had said, he rushed up to see if I was insane. And that's when the big trouble started. It had taken 72 years, but just like Abigail had predicted, my declaration started a revolution. Now, back then, ministers, all men, of course, spoke out against my ideas.
Women belong at home.
Newspaper reporters, again, all men, of course, wrote that what they thought about my declaration. A woman is nobody. A wife is everything. Lawmakers, all men, of course, laughed.
Women certainly do not belong in the voting booth.
I wasn't surprised that my idea shocked so many people. Neither was Lucretia. We knew it was going to be a long, hard fight before women won equality. But I had no doubts that we would succeed. With so many newspapers all over the country reporting on the Seneca Falls Convention, word spread about my ideas. Lots of women agreed with me. Meetings popped up in towns and cities in the North and the Midwest, and 1,000 women came to the first National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1850. Look at all those places they came from. Sojourner Truth, who had escaped from slavery, went to a meeting in Ohio. She caused quite a stir when she reminded white women there that Black women were treated even worse than they were.
So that man over there says that a woman needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. Ain't I a woman? In the spring of 1851, a 31-year-old school teacher named Susan B. Anthony visited Elizabeth. The two women became fast friends. They traveled everywhere and made lots of speeches together. But after a while, it became too hard for Elizabeth to travel. She had to stay home and bake and cook and wash and sew and care for her children and husband. Susan B., who was single, went anywhere and everywhere. Other women hit the lecture trail too. The Suffrage Express included Sarah Grimke, Ernestine Rhodes, Lucy Stone, Antoinette Brown, Angelina Grimke, Frances Gage, Susan B. Anthony, Pauline Davis, Abby Keller Foster, and Frances Harper. Soon women started doing what men and even some women called unladylike things. Amelia Bloomer promoted new comfortable clothing for women. Women could hardly breathe or move in their tight-laced long dresses with heavy petticoats underneath. Some petticoats weighed as much as 14 pounds. And as if Amelia's clothing wasn't unladylike enough.
Women should not dress like men.
Mary Lyon opened a female seminary known today as Mount Holyoke College. The women studied science and mathematics, geography, rhetoric, philosophy, astronomy, ancient and modern history, subjects that men studied in their colleges. Two sisters, Elizabeth and Emily Blackwell, became doctors. When no hospital would hire them, they set up their own clinic for women and children and a medical school for women. Antoinette Brown became a minister and preached in church. And then there was Lucy Stone. At her marriage ceremony to Harry Blackwell, one of Elizabeth and Emily's brothers, she refused to say she would obey her husband. Harry agreed, and Lucy kept her name after they were married.
We believe that marriage should be an equal partnership.
In snow, in rain, in hail, the suffragists traveled everywhere. Suffragist is a name for a woman who fought for the vote. They gave speeches even during blizzards. Many times than not, they were mocked and booed by men and by women too. But their hard work and dedication helped. In Massachusetts and New York, married women finally gained the right to own property and to keep whatever money they earned. But no matter how many people the suffragists talked to, and no matter how many petitions they signed, and no matter how hard they worked to win the right to vote, lawmakers still refused to change the law. By April 1861, the issue of slavery split the country and led to a civil war between the North and South. Women on both sides of the conflict worked for the war effort, doing more unladylike things. They prepared and delivered supplies to the soldiers. They lived in tents on the battlefields and fed and nursed the wounded. Some women became spies. A few even dressed as men. Women like Rose Greenhow, Confederate spy, Sarah Edmonds, Union soldier, Susie King, Union nurse, Phoebe Pember, Confederate nurse, Pauline Cashman, Union spy, Loretta Vasquez, Confederate soldier, Belle Boyd, Confederate spy, Clara Barton, Union nurse, Sarah Wakeman, Union soldier, Sally Tompkins, Confederate nurse. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It freed over 3 million Black men, women, and children in slavery. But it did not free enslaved African Americans everywhere in the United States. When the North won the war, the suffragists set out to change that. They held meetings and started a letter-writing campaign. They collected more than 400,000 signatures in support of abolition. January 31st, 1865, the United States Congress passed the 13th Amendment, ending slavery everywhere in the United States. Then the lawmakers began debating giving the vote to Black men. Now, Elizabeth thought, is our chance to get the vote too. But they didn't.
So the suffragists kept on traveling and making speeches. Susan B. racked up the most, more than 75 each year for 45 years. Even people who opposed women voting agreed that Lucy Stone, too, was an especially great speaker. But the lawmakers didn't listen. Sojourner tried to vote in Battle Creek, Michigan, and was turned away. Susan B. was arrested and fined when she went to the polls in Rochester, New York, but she refused to pay. Then, hooray for Wyoming!
Yay!
Yay!
Women won the right to vote there. Next, in Kansas, then Colorado, Utah, and Idaho. and then in Washington, California, Arizona, and Oregon. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. and Lucy Stone and Lucretia and Sojourner grew old and died. New women, including myself, continued the fight. Lucy Barnes and I, we were fed up. 69 years had passed since Elizabeth read her declaration, and we could only vote in 9 states. No more speeches, we said. No more trying to win over male lawmakers. It was time to do something different to get their attention. So we held a parade. On March 3rd, 1913, a day before President Wilson's inauguration, 8,000 women marched down the streets of Washington, D.C. Following them were 26 floats, 10 bands, 4 mounted brigades, 3 heralds, and 6 chariots. Angry spectators shouted ugly names and even shoved us. Soldiers had to be called in to stop the attacks. Even people who didn't believe that we should be allowed to vote were outraged at the treatment of the marchers. The suffragists kept on marching and talking to the lawmakers. More lawmakers listened. Hooray for Montana and Nevada,
Hooray!
Yeah.
Hooray for New York, 1917. Hooray for Michigan, South Dakota, and Oklahoma, 1918. On January 10th, 1917, the suffragists started picketing in front of the White House. In rain, in snow, in blistering heat, they stood silently with their signs. Angry mobs attacked them. The police did nothing to protect them, nor did they arrest any of their attackers. In the next 11 months, more than 200 women were arrested for picketing. Almost 100 women served time in prison. I was sentenced to 7 months and thrown into solitary confinement for 2 weeks, with nothing to eat but bread and water. Lucy Burns and 40 other women were beaten. Other suffragists took their places in front of the White House. Newspapers wrote about the brutal treatment of the women. Support for the cause grew. A judge finally ruled that these arrests were unconstitutional and ordered the women free. A year after the women started picketing, President Wilson declared his support for an amendment to the Constitution, giving women the right to vote. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote became law. The lawmakers had finally done what Abigail Adams wanted the Founding Fathers to do in that big room in Philadelphia so long ago. The women had triumphed after battling for the vote for 72 years, but they knew their work was not over. There were still many unfair laws to change so that women could have true equality with men. And we're still working on it.